As they say, wait a minute and the weather changes. If you don't like it, just hang around in New York City and soon you'll get exactly what you like. Sometimes it's a little too much weather coming your way, and disasters happen quite frequently in New York City. There is a guy who is there to handle it all, emergency management commissioner. First of all, Zach, it's great to see you. Zach Iscol, you've been in this role for how long? Since when?
3 years and 4 days, but who is counting? That's
It's
not
hard.
dog years. This job also, sometimes you can, I think in dog years, it's, 21 years and change.
Well, yeah, because if you go down the list of things that have happened since you've been in this role, you can really swing from the end of COVID to the big, huge, devastating floods that we had in Queens, which were from thunderstorms that came through. There was a drought in 2024. We're getting ready to roll into maybe 4 or 5 days of temperatures that are colder than Alaska. So really, it's been a roller coaster ride.
We deal with it all here. We like to call it job security. I've got plenty of job security here in New York City, but also jokes aside, we have an amazing team here, and I have just been so impressed by the work they do, and they really are unsung heroes. I mean, they work 24/7, 365 days a year, and it's not just the folks here at the agency. It's all of our agency partners that whether it's winter weather, flash floods, summer heat. They are working on weekends. They're working on holidays. There's a lot that goes on in the background that I think most even New Yorkers are not aware of how much goes into keeping people safe, keeping this city running through all sorts of weather and other types of emergencies.
It's a role and a job where you have to be ready for literally anything. What do you think most prepared you for this? Because you look back at your history, you're a Marine combat veteran, you've done a lot of public service over the years. What made you want to get into a role like this where you're literally, you almost have a hand of cards that you're dealt, you don't know exactly what's going to come your way, but you got to be ready for everything in the deck?
Yeah. So we joke here that in New York City you've got the finest, the NYPD, you've got the bravest, the fire department, you've got the strongest, our sanitation workers, you've got the toughest, which is our folks at Department of Environmental Protection that do all of the infrastructure, the water mains, making sure that stuff's working underground, and then here we're the most ready, but we also like to consider ourselves the most nervous. So, maybe it's just part of my Jewish upbringing. Like we are a nervous people. It's kept us alive for 5,000 years. And so that keeps us ready for these types of events or whatever might come our way here in New York City. But look, in my background, I was in the Marine Corps. I did a number of tours overseas. I fought during the Second Battle of Fallujah, which is the largest battle of the Iraq War. Served in the special operations community. I've been involved in a lot of different emergencies. I went down to Haiti after the earthquake. I helped lead some of the efforts out on the Rockaways after Hurricane Sandy. It's actually how I met my wife. And then, did a lot of work during COVID, running one of the only successful COVID field hospitals here in New York City. But I think, the role that we play here is, it's really, government works best when it works together. How do you bring together not just government agencies, private sector partnerships, community-based organizations, nonprofits? And interestingly enough, that really ties to my background in the Marines. In the Marine Corps, we fight as what we call an air-ground task force. Marines are never alone on the battlefield. As a platoon commander, your most important weapon is your radio. It's how you control your squads. It's how you coordinate with adjacent units. It's how you get air support, supplies, artillery, mortars, indirect fire. So all that coordination that you sort of learn as the fundamentals of being a Marine Corps infantry officer, it really applies to a lot of the work that we do in emergency management of how do you bring people together? How do you coordinate? How do you plan? How do you get everybody working to solve a problem to make sure that we are delivering for the people of New York City?
I like the coordination. The background makes total sense to me. It's a great story, though. Before we go any further forward, you met your wife while you guys were both volunteering in Hurricane Sandy recovery. Is that right?
Yeah. So we met a little bit earlier. We met on September 12th, 2012. a good friend of mine introduced me to her, and I remember we were waiting for her. She was a few minutes late, which my wife is right. That is on brand with my wife, and she stepped out of this black town car, wearing a white dress and a black leather jacket. I was head over heels right away. She was not interested in me. A lot of people find that hard to believe. And then when Hurricane Sandy happened, my wife had lived downtown during 9/11, and she remembers how the city really came together. And at this time, she was living uptown. We had a 6, almost 7-year-old daughter at the time, who's now our daughter. She's now 19. It's hard to believe, in college,
Time flies.
boyfriend, the whole thing. But she was uptown, and uptown was not really affected by Sandy. And she wanted her daughter, Eloise, our daughter now, to get a sense of that unity and of the importance of contributing. And nobody would let anyone under the age of 18 volunteer. And so the friend who set us up said, "Oh, you should call Zach. He's helping run some of these volunteer efforts." And Meredith said, "I don't want to bother him. It sounds like he's busy." And my friend said, "He has not stopped talking about you in 2 or 3 months. Give him a call." She called me. She came out with her daughter and her dad. And on their drive back to the city, her dad said, "Why don't you date a guy like Zach?" And so I got dinner out of it, and 4 kids.
You got a
3
shot. That was
rescued
your shot.
dogs later. That was my shot. Hurricane Sandy gave me the opportunity I needed.
Great story. As you've gone through this role, there is the public service element of it, but there also is a political, effort that's involved here, because you've got to be ready. You've got to go on camera. You've got to explain to news organizations, the public, et cetera, what's going on, how prepared the city will be, et cetera. Is there anything that keeps you up at night? Are you just like, if that happens?
So I think one is, yes, we have an obligation to keep the New Yorkers informed. In terms of what keeps me up at night, like I said, we've got 4 kids, 3 rescue dogs. Our bed can become a pretty busy place at night with everybody piling in, and little people, dogs, they take up a lot of room, even in a king size mattress. I think though, there's a couple things. One is our job is not just to be there during emergencies. Our job is also to keep New Yorkers informed, to make sure New Yorkers are prepared for emergencies, to make sure the city is prepared, and then to help people recover, businesses recover, community recovers as quickly as possible on the tail end of an emergency. And so there's a lot of work that we do. There's a lot of lessons I've learned in this job about public communication. I remember during one of our first real severe weather events, I was really focused on, getting the information out to the public that they needed to keep themselves safe. Mm-hmm. And so I spent the entire press conference talking about what New Yorkers needed to do. And some of the feedback I got is that I actually ended up really scaring a lot of folks. People wanted to hear what the city was doing. They wanted to hear what we were doing to prepare for the city, how we were staging life safety units around the city, that the PD was going to be out on highways, that we were working with the hospitals, that we were, preparing the infrastructure. And then you can sort of talk about, hey, by the way, here's some things that you can do to help out your neighbors. Here's some things that you can do to be prepared. But you sort of got to really manage people's emotions in this job, which is a big part of it as well. Because a lot of these things can be very scary. And so I think for me, it's balancing, letting people know that the city is prepared. There's a lot that we do on the back that might not be seen. But at the same time, there's a lot that New Yorkers can do, or people can do, just so that they can be self-reliant and make sure that they're also prepared to take care of themselves and their loved ones and the people that matter.
When I first started doing weather in New York City, there was for lack of a better description, a war room, a sort of crisis management. Let's all come together and come up with a game plan. Does that still exist? Is that still operational, where multi-agencies come together and they are started preparing, deciding how they're going to interact with different New York neighborhoods and different New York services like the subways?
Yeah, so it happens constantly. So we have just upstairs from me, we have our watch command, which is operated 24/7, 365 days a year. From watch command, we do three things. So we monitor everything going on in the city 24/7. That's weather, infrastructure, utilities, 311 complaints, PD calls, FDNY responses, EMS responses. We're watching everything. And then we can send folks out to respond to incidents as they are becoming worse, right? If there's a fire that becomes a 3-4 alarm fire with impacts in a neighborhood, we can send folks out to help folks that might be impacted by that fire. If there's a water main break or a flood, we can send folks out to address that. And at the same time, it's also the city's Rolodex. So as our folks go out on the scene and we see that there's a need for certain services, maybe we need the Red Cross, maybe we need traffic agents, maybe we need Con Ed to go out there and shut off utilities. Our team can call back to Watch Command and they can then call over to those agencies to deploy those resources. And then the third thing that happens there is public warning and public messaging. So as things occur around the city that we need to let people know about, we issue alerts. We have a lot of tools that we can do that. We use social media. We can do press stand-ups. We have Notify NYC with over 1.5 million subscribers, available in 14 languages. People can sign up for that notification system. We also have our wireless emergency alerts where, it's the Amber Alerts that you get that we can send notices out to everybody's phone in the city. So a lot goes on there. Then we also, for larger events, we have our Emergency Operations Center, which is if we need more agencies physically located together. We have our Situation Room. But also a lot of stuff now happens on Teams, on Microsoft Teams,
Really?
on Zooms.
Okay.
So whereas in the past for a snowstorm, maybe we would all need to get into a room. Now we don't have to worry about having people travel during inclement weather. They can work from their operation centers around the city. And it enables us to coordinate much more effectively using some of those technologies.
Tell me a little bit about the newest technology. I know that they had the Spot Dog or the Digi Dog at the NYPD. I know they've used different types of robots down in the subways, or at least talked about it and done some testing. And then I heard about the drones. They're the drones that flew into some of the boroughs to talk about, hey, there's weather coming, prepare.
Yeah. So we've been very forward with using technology. I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, we had a really awful garage collapse on Ann Street downtown.
Yes.
And
EV garage.
unfortunately, one of the workers in the garage died. He was killed. But we were working with the fire department and the Department of Buildings and some contractors on the debris removal. We were using drones, and we also used the robot dog, right? We could send the dog in there into places that it would be dangerous to send first responders to get a look at some of the infrastructure, to look at some of the cars, and help guide some of the response efforts as we were removing vehicles and taking apart that garage. We've also used drones pretty extensively at this agency. We used them, last summer we had a shark attack on the beach. So we put together an interagency task force with the PD, FDNY, where we were flying drones, looking for marine life, and working in concert with with the Parks Department and the lifeguards over there. We've used them extensively at fires, water main breaks, looking for water main breaks in some areas of the city. We used them for the brush fires during the drought last fall. And we use them during fires, to help keep firefighters safe, look for hot pockets. And then one of the other things that we're exploring with drones is public messaging, right? So, there is a lot of communities around New York City. We have believe it or not, over 700 languages are spoken in New York City.
It's wild.
About 270, 230 are spoken fairly regularly. And so one of the things that we need to contend with is often the folks that are going to be most at risk during a flooding event, during fires, during these different types of emergencies, they are often not English speaking. Right, they're immigrant communities, non-English speaking communities in Queens, in parts of Brooklyn, the Bronx. Some of them are not going to be willing to sign up for something like Notify NYC, but it's still incumbent upon us who our job is to keep all 8.3 million New Yorkers safe, to get them the information they need to stay safe. And so we've explored a whole range of tools. We do canvassing. We do do a lot of work with local and ethnic media to get the word out, with local elected leaders. We do events in places like Diversity Plaza in Queens, which is the most diverse place on earth. But one of the other things that we've used is looking into the use of drones to provide messaging to the public about incoming weather or other types of events that they need to have information about.
It's kind of a wild concept, though, to think that a drone could be flying around, but it's got information that people need to know. And as a meteorologist, I can tell you the messaging, you just talked about the long list and the many ways it can happen. Messaging is what saves lives. So even the concept of these drones flying around might seem a little, lack of a better term, foreign to people. This is the way that you might reach the person that is unreachable in another way. So I think it's pretty fascinating. Is it still experimental? Can people depend on it? Is it just something new you're trying?
It's something new that we're trying and experimenting with. But I think the important thing for people to know about is there's no panacea to this, right? Mm-hmm. There's no one way of reaching everybody in the city. And so we take a multi-platform approach to getting the information out there. So we do news, we do press conferences, we do emails, we do Notify NYC, we do social media, we do canvassing, we send messages out to every elected to share with their constituents. We have something called the AWS, the Advanced Warning System, where we have partnerships with, I think it's about 4,000 organizations around the city that serve people with disabilities and functional needs. They run dialysis centers, older adult centers. We send information out to them so that they can share with their constituents. So we take an approach where we use every single resource possible to get information out to the public, because that is what will save lives when people have the information. I grew up watching G.I. Joe. Knowing is half the battle. I don't know if you remember that from.
That is a great throwback.
It is a throwback.
That being a child, but I haven't heard that for a long time.
I convinced my mom to let me watch G.I. Joe because there was always a lesson at the end when, Snake Eyes or one of the other folks would get up and say, knowing's half the battle, here's the lesson. But knowing is half the battle. And I think it's really important that we take every step possible to make sure, especially our most vulnerable, have the information they need to stay safe.
You and I have had conversations over the years about hurricane preparedness, storm preparedness, et cetera. I maintain that if a hurricane is coming to New York City, go to the hospital. It's the safest place. But in all seriousness, I feel like there's been so much work done on hurricane preparedness. It is something that's evolutionary because it's so expensive, and the infrastructure that's required to protect New York. I think hurricane, storm surge, water in general is our biggest risk. However, there was an article that was written in Rolling Stone back in 2016. The title of the article was, "Will America's Worst Wildfire Disaster Happen in New Jersey?" Then, of course, we had the Canadian wildfires, and we saw the incredible, really terrifying impact on air quality that the wildfires had. We just came out of a summer. I know we had a lot of stuff happening late in 2024 with these fires, the brush fires and so forth. I tend to think that the Pine Barrens, where we've got New Jersey's coastal area there, where you've got about 500,000 people living, the Pine Barrens are still just so vulnerable to fires, and that is our direct line of wind into New York City. Are there sort of hidden natural disasters that maybe haven't happened yet that you're having to think about and prepare for? And how did that air quality impact in New York City with the Canadian wildfires? How much of that did you have to respond to?
Yeah. So I think, look, we are always, it's such a great question. You're always sort of preparing for the last war. And so, yes, we have done a tremendous amount of work to prepare for coastal storms. But the way I think about that is the work that we do for coastal storms are applicable to other types of emergencies. So we use in emergency management what we call a stress case, which is sort of like, what is the worst thing that can happen? And you prepare for that, but in doing so, it enables you to prepare for other things. So as an example, and I'll talk about air quality in a second, but we had to deal with this migrant crisis in New York City. We had about 240,000 people that came to New York City. In New York, we have a right to shelter. So a lot of folks think that this is about sanctuary city status. It's actually not. It's about us being a right to shelter.
So many people would be surprised to know that the Emergency Management Office really had a huge role in, and still does have a role in what's going on there.
Yeah, and so because we have a right to shelter, we have a legal obligation to provide shelter and services to folks that are coming to New York City. And that is from a court ruling going back to 1981. It's one of the reasons that New York City doesn't have some of the homeless encampments that you see in other places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so we have provided care and shelter and services to about 230,000 people. 180, 190,000 of them we've enabled to take the next step, get their work authorizations, and get out of the system, get jobs, and go on to do their own thing. But in sheltering folks, part of what we have with our coastal storm plan for hurricanes is we have a sheltering plan. Now that sheltering plan is designed to provide shelter to 70,000 people for 3 or 4 days, not 230,000 people over the course of a number of years. But the team was able to take that part of the plan and adapt it to this novel emergency. And in emergency management, we take what we call an all hazards approach. So the press sort of blasted us for this comment I made during the air quality event in June 6th of 23, where I said, we don't have a plan for air quality. And what I was trying to maybe clumsily explain is at emergency management, while we have 100 plans to deal with different emergencies in the city, at the end of the day, what we really have is an all hazards planning process where we have a process in place that enables us to deal with anything, regardless of the cause, regardless of what the impacts are, and that's called the all hazards planning. It's by design because you can't predict everything that's going to happen. Right, especially when you look at the number of novel incidents we faced in New York City over the last 3 years. And so for the air quality, that's what I was trying to explain around that. And so what did we do? We have a commodity distribution plan. So we're able to get N95 masks out to every firehouse, every precinct, and the libraries for distribution to the public. We have a advanced warning system and public messaging system where we're able to get critical information out to the public very quickly about the risks of air quality. So there's elements of different plans where we're able to look at the impacts, look at the needs, monitoring EMS call volume, right, to see, are we seeing an increase in health impacts because of this? So there are things that sort of work into that. Now, some of the lessons we learned from the air quality incident was ways that we can better partner with New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation, which actually monitors air quality. They're the state entity chartered with that around forecasting. Air quality is very hard to forecast, but looking at getting ahead of that a little bit. So there are some lessons that came out of that we then developed a protocol for monitoring wildfire smoke, which we used, during the wildfires we were seeing from the drought just this past fall.
Right. At one time, there were about 5,000 brush fires going at the same time. That does create a lot of problems. But it is a very important part of emergency management planning is that sometimes you are impacted by a natural disaster that did not happen where you are. And so that is exceptionally tricky when you've got a large population, a small amount of a space. As I've talked to you over the years, I mentioned we talked a little bit about your public service. I know you've been involved for a long time with the Headstrong program, probably a decade now. When you look at these service moments that you've had in your life, the public service, it's translated in some ways over to political, a run for the mayorship. What do you see in the future? Do you want to be more on a political stage for New York City? I mean, I have to be honest with you. Living in New York for 16 years, I've been surprised over and over again the people that are serving in public office because it's kind of this political, you got to get into the political office. Whereas one of the greatest mayors we've had is Bloomberg. He was a businessman. And I also think in the greatest city in the world, we should have a very competitive political, infrastructure in place where we've got people who really want to serve and they're highly qualified. And, if you look at American history, people who've served in military, tend to do very well serving in political office. What do you think is your long-term plan on that?
I really don't know what my long-term plan is. I know I want to be present as, and I'm not avoiding the question. I want to be present as a father and a husband. I want to have a job where I'm able to feel a sense of purpose and meaning. I lost one of my best friends was killed in Iraq, a guy named Ronnie Winchester. And when I was growing up, I lost a friend of mine when I was younger, who was like an older brother, died in a car accident. And I remember at his funeral, the rabbi pulled all of us aside, and I think I was 14, 15 years old at the time. And the rabbi said, you young people, you now have an obligation to live your lives, to live the life that, his name was John Schlesinger, that John was not able to live.
Wow.
And in Iraq, when we would lose a Marine, I would pull my Marines into a school circle, and I would talk to them about we'd grieve, and we'd talk about the Marine that was just lost. And I would say, you guys now have an obligation to live your life for that Marine who was killed. And I think it's hard to say what we accomplished in a place like Iraq or these wars that we've been fighting now for 20 years overseas. And so for me, it's how do you give meaning to the sacrifice of those who didn't make it home? Well, some of us made it home because of their sacrifice. And we have an obligation to make their sacrifice worthy. And so, I think about Ronnie Winchester and folks like Byron Norwood. Every time I put my kids to bed, every time I walk into their room, right, they never had an opportunity to have a family. And I think that's one of the drives of public service as well, is there's survivor's guilt that drives it. There's a need to give meaning to my life. There's a Shirley Chisholm quote, service is the rent we pay for space on this planet. And I really believe that. And so I think for me, my hope is that I'm able to keep finding ways of making a difference. I'm very fortunate that, while there is, and I don't want to get into the politics, but while there is a lot of political turmoil around the country, I get to come to a place every day and work with amazing public servants. I mean,
Have you, over the time of public service and even just the nature of how life has gone, I talked to, this is kind of interesting. Commissioner Bratton, I talked to Bill Bratton a couple of weeks ago, and I said, there's some things about New York City people might want to change. People have been more vocal lately. There are things that they want to have happen. I said, what can they do to make a difference or make it, have some sort of impact on the changes they want to see? And he brought it all back to politics. He brought it all back to the vote. And what was shocking to me, Zach, which I could really make a case for, this is an emergency crisis in New York. We have 8.3 million people. We only have 300,000 people voting. And we've got a real obligation, as you say, for the sacrifices that have been made and also for the changes we want to see to get people out to vote. And sometimes it does take really seeing the system, really seeing how change is impacted and affected to get people up and out to vote. But it's surprising, is it not, that we have 300,000 voting New York City, ballot droppers comparable to a city of 8.3 million. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah, I think more people do need to vote. I think more people need to pay attention to who they are voting for. We've got an election coming up in June, a major primary for mayor. We've got a lot of local electeds that are up. Next year we'll have, statewide races, congressional races, midterms, right? So it is incredibly important. I think, some folks may feel that their vote doesn't matter, but it really, really does, especially when so few people are voting. But it's also, I sent a note to my team the other day, and I just said to them, stay the course. We've got, the politicians are going to do their things. The voters will do their thing. We need to do ours. And I think what I would also encourage folks to do is, especially in a place like New York, is thank your public servants. Thank the police officers, thank the firefighters, thank the sanitation workers. You see somebody with an emergency management jacket out of the scene, just thank them. It means a lot to the folks, and teachers. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of people that show up day in and day out. You look at our MTA workers, and what they're on the front lines of in our subways. There's 300,000 plus men and women who are showing up every day, keeping this incredible city running, and I feel very lucky that I get to interact with them the way I do. We have a snowstorm. I can't remember. It was like maybe 2 weeks ago, and I went out. I was out with the sanitation commissioner a bit, but like, you stop by, you speak to like some of the NYPD tow truck folks that are on the bridges or the highways, right? They're out there in the freezing cold, just waiting for a car to break down so they can quickly move it so that folks can get home, to their families. And they're doing it on Saturday nights, Friday nights, holidays, you name it.
I think it's a great point. And I'm going to wrap here in a second, but before I even do that, I'm going to say thank you for your service, both in the military and to the city, because it's important. And you make a great point there. There are so many who are out, definitely in the elements and in the weather every single. New York is an outdoor life. And so it's a lifestyle that you've got to be ready to face the full spectrum, from heat waves to hurricanes to extreme cold and blizzards. Do you have a go bag? Do you suggest New Yorkers have a go bag? When I look at weather coast to coast, it is a big topic of emergency preparedness, just having that one personal go bag.
Yeah. So we have lots of go bags in our house.
With all the kids, yes.
We have small go bags. We have large go bags. My wife is the most wonderful, kindest human being on the planet. We have a go bag for our fish. I mean, we've actually gone on family trips where she's got the fish bowl on her lap in the car, 4 kids packed in the back with the 3 dogs. What I encourage everybody to do is there's sort of 2 things that you need. One is sort of the immediate go bag, right? And so one of the things we see all the time is there'll be a fire. People will have to leave their building, and they forgot their medication, they forgot their cell phone, they might not have something warm to wear, and it's really cold, and they don't have any cash on them or their credit cards or ID. Those are just things that if you have to leave your home in a hurry, that you just want to make sure that you have, right? That cell phone is a connection to your family and your loved ones that you can maybe find a couch to hang out on while you're waiting to get back into your building. Then there's also, knowing what you're going to need for larger types of events, right? And every family, every household is different. As I mentioned, I've got my wife, our kids, our rescue dogs. Our go bag's going to look very different than if you have somebody with disabilities or functional needs, older adults in the home. Occasionally, my mother-in-law is with us. But you might have medications that you need. So we provide resources at our website, nyc.gov/ReadyNY, where you can sort of create a go bag that works for you and your household, because every household is different, right? If you have pets, if you don't have pets, if you have medications, not medications, children, older adults, you name it. And so that will be a little bit different for everybody.
Yeah, the to-go bag in every type of natural hazard, I've seen it prove its worth over and over and again, and people learn the lesson if they haven't had one the next time they are definitely.
And it's also just one point on that. It also varies on where you live too. 2 of my best friends, they lost their home in the Palisades during the fire, and my wife and I went out to Los Angeles to visit them a couple weeks ago. Their daughter just had her bat mitzvah. After the fires, they went ahead with it, and talking to her, she said, I thought I was going to be able to go back to the house, and if I'd known there was some other things I would have taken, and so there's also things that digitizing photos, right, and family things that really matter to you. There's a lot that you can do. I think that people should have a digital go bag as well, right? Where you take important documents, license, passport, social security, you can just email them to yourself, right, on Google or another system so that you have access to them if you need them, insurance documents. So there's a lot that folks can do, but it just really hit home for me, especially because I love her and her husband so much. But when she just said, if I'd known I wasn't going to go home again, there's just some other things I would have I've grabbed or thought to take.
Yeah, it certainly can be a great lesson to watching some of these events happen and putting yourself in that circumstance and saying, what would I do? How would I react? What could I do? There's always lessons to be learned. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk here, and I wish you all the best as you go through what really is a unknown every single day. And now I'm going to be thinking G.I. Joe more and more because knowing is part of the battle. It's half the battle, sometimes more. And we all are learning these lessons. But I can tell you this, having done so many natural disasters, being there to predict them and then being there in the moment when they're hitting, it does feel good to have someone like you and your staff at the helm in New York City, because you may not have all the answers to everything all the time, but you're going to find out. And that is really what preparedness is all about, is knowing the right questions to ask and being ready to come with a plan. And I think that New York City is in pretty good hands. We're very lucky.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for the work that you do. One of the things in getting information out to the public, we can't do it without our partners in the media. So thanks for keeping people informed and keep helping us keeping people prepared.
You got it. Emergency Manager of New York City, Commissioner of the entire Emergency Management Department, Zach Iscol. Thank you so much for being with us.